Welcome to Not on the Lesson Plan. This is a podcast for the movers, the shakers, and the misfits in education, because teaching isn't just one path, and I want to help teachers understand that there's lots of different steps that you can take inside and out of education to help you support the next generation. So, to start off with, I want to talk about my journey. This is season 1, episode 1 of a podcast that I hope is going to support teachers out there, teachers who are in the classroom, who are just outside of the classroom and beyond. And I want to talk about things that are not necessarily always on the curriculum. I think there's a lot of podcasts and things out there at the moment for teachers to support with pedagogy, lessons, all sorts of things like that. But I don't necessarily think there's many things to support teachers with the things happening outside of the curriculum, yet affect the day-to-day lives of so many teachers out there. Teaching is huge. If you go to education conferences around the world, you'll realise just how huge teaching, education and beyond is. But what we often see is just the classroom and our 30, 35, sometimes, let's be honest, little mates that we see on a day-to-day basis. So I want this podcast to connect people around the world, support them with a range of different things to do with well-being, entrepreneurialism, and all sorts of other things like that. And I want to talk about what the plans are for this podcast, who I am, where the plans are of where we're going with things, and beyond. So let's talk about where I am at the moment, what this journey is, and the plans. Let's jump into it. So to start off with, my name is Thomas Blakemore, and I am a primary school teacher. Today is a Monday, and I should be in a classroom teaching, but I'm not, because I'm also a supply teacher at the moment, and I've not received a call. Now, if we think about my historical dedication to the trade of teaching, I have taught for nearly a decade now. Beyond that, if you count the teacher training, and I've often found myself and thought of myself as a bit of a misfit in the education world. I love teaching. I love being in the classroom, teaching the lessons, doing all that. But the admin side of things is not something I'm particularly strong with. I have, over my decade of teaching, become a lot better at it. But I always felt that there were better people suited towards that. But that's where I felt like a bit of a misfit. And in other ways, I felt like a bit of a misfit because by day, I was this Miss Honey character. For those of you who don't know who Miss Honey is, who think of Matilda, the perfect golden teacher who dedicates their entire life to teaching, progression, helping children and being this perfect teacher. And I like to think that I had an element of that, but by night, I kind of shifted into this kind of entrepreneurial outset where I was much more dedicated to supporting kind of other teachers as well. I think when we think about things like Miss Honey, that is we glorify it and we glamorize it. Miss Honey is this typical A-grade special teacher, and we don't often see the behind the scenes of what Miss Honey went through. And I think this podcast in particular wants to talk about all those different things that perhaps we didn't see with Miss Honey's life. The challenges, the admin, everything that they had to do to make sure that that classroom is spick and span. But I also want to talk about those things that I was really interested in, kind of entrepreneurial side. Those people who were exceeded in education. Not that I can say that I was one of those people, but those people who were in that position, they exceeded and they decided, you know what, with this thing, whatever it is, I want to do something with it. And there are so many different niche education businesses and individuals running those businesses that I think is really inspiring. And even if you can take a small lesson from some of those individuals who are doing those things, I think it'll be really interesting. But that's less about me and more about the podcast. So my journey, I started off teaching in the UK. I went through a very typical journey. I was very privileged with my journey. I went to a university up north in the UK called let's give it a shout, Edge Hill University. It was a very good university for teaching. I was super blessed, privileged with that university and the different opportunities that it gave me. I was blessed that during my teacher training, I had the chance to come and do teacher training practical, the element where you're in the classroom, in my hometown. So I was able to be at home and be comfortable. But what that also meant is that during the time where I was going for interviews slightly later on down the line, the offers were almost already there, because a lot of the schools that started to have jobs come up were schools that I'd already done teacher training in. So I was very privileged that I didn't have to go through your typical interview process, because schools already knew, well, I did go through an interview process, but I kind of already had that foot in the door. So I was definitely in a lucky position in that regard. It's kind of funny now, nearly a decade later, I'm now going through, for me, it feels less traditional, but for everyone else, it's your traditional interview process. In university, I was doing really well. I got first at university, which was big blessing because I am not an academic individual. In fact, during university, I found out, I'm going to say it, I don't think I've even announced this on my YouTube channel yet, but we'll talk about YouTube slightly later on. I'm dyslexic. I found out at university that I was dyslexic. And for me, discussion, talking was my coping method. I thrived in anything that was kind of, there was one particular assignment where you had to create a seminar, and I thrived at that. But when it came to things like our mini dissertation type thing, which didn't actually have to do with dissertation, which was strange, but hey ho, I didn't do so well at that because I spent hours and hours inside and out of the library reading or trying to read lots of different books. So I want to have opportunities to talk to people about that because I don't think that gets discussed a lot. Some of the opportunities to cater for teachers. So I was really lucky through my university practice that I went to a really good university, had really good times, did lots of amazing things at university through sport and bits and pieces like that. But even at university, I always had the kind of entrepreneurial spirit. I've met some really interesting people during university, and I was like, oh, okay, you're doing some really cool things. And I started to think about things that were a bit out there in terms of like how people revised and the technology opportunities. And I became really geeky with things like that. So technology is definitely going to form a small foundation of what we do on this podcast, not on the lesson plan, because I think it does help with reclaiming teachers' lives and bits and pieces to do with the curriculum that aren't necessarily discussed. But after university, I went to my first position. So like I said, I was lucky. I had 3 interviews with schools that I already had positions in. One school was pretty chocker, so that was not something there was not a huge amount of opportunity there. I almost had 2 offers. I went with the middle school that I did my middle placement in, and that was such an eye-opening experience. Again, I feel extremely lucky. You'll soon learn that I'm very positive when I talk about things. That school was challenging, but in the best way. And my learning experiences were phenomenal. I had a really good team member with me who was my leader and my mentor, and she was a brilliant mentor and brilliant teacher. I don't really know, I think she might have been a robot. I don't know if she happens to listen to this, she'd chuckle at that. But some of the things that she was able to just come up with, to create, to help me with, were really quite inspiring. But that first class that I think I had 34 or 35 children, year 5, 6. It's funny to think now that class that I first taught, they have probably graduated university, or maybe they're in university now, which is absolutely bizarre. But they went through those opportunities, and I was really, really blessed to have that eye-opening experience, because it was almost just a matter of like survival. And during that NQT year, I got through it. I'd learned so much. Then I went into my RQT year, and because first year went so well, I then went and became a year 6 teacher. Year 6 teacher in your RQT year, some people do their NQT year as a year 6 teacher, which I admire, and hats off to you. For anyone that happens to be listening to this in America, year 6 is like just before you kind of like, year 6 is just before they go to like high school in the UK. I know things are slightly different over there, but yeah, year 6 was crazy. That year was really quite tough in terms of accountability, and I found things quite challenging. During that time, I also went through some personal challenges, and it was during those times of challenge where I just wanted to have some sort of way to switch off at the end of the day. I think this is a really important thing to talk about in another episode, because it formed the foundations of what you see or what you're hearing right now, which is this podcast, but my content creation journey. I've been a content creator now for 8 years. Like I said, I've been teaching for 10. I've been a content creator for 8. but content creating in a range of different formats in the way that I've consumed content has often formed the foundation of how I create content. So when I was in that RQT year, a lot of the times I'd be spending so many hours marking and doing lots of different things to do with administration and bits and pieces like that. So I used to have lots of YouTube videos on in the background, and I decided that I wanted to change it from being the consumer to being the creator. And I decided to launch a YouTube channel. And it was that YouTube channel that I used to support my year sixes. At the time, they were going through their first SATs, and some of the children who were going through those SATs were quite anxious about things. So I decided, do you know what? I want this to be a little bit different. I started to make videos, SATs videos, and I decided that I was going to make some different travel vlogs and bits and pieces to, I say, support my year six class, but in some ways to support me, so that I had a creative outlet, because at the time everything was work, 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 teaching, work, come home, mark, do things, go back to work. So it was just on a Sunday, I knew that I would create some sort of video, and that's what I did. And one of the videos that I created, one of my first videos, was actually based on a journey that I went to Dubai. There was lots of reasons why I decided to start YouTube. One of the reasons was to do with a character called Logan Paul, who made some negative Japan videos, and children came in the next day talking about that video that wasn't appropriate, and I decided there was a seed planted there that was a little bit like, maybe I could do some content. But along with that, with wanting to create rather than consume, I decided that I would, have a go. And I was also going to Dubai because I was kind of interested in teaching there. And during that time, one of the kids was like, can you share it with us? I was like, well, that's obviously strange. But I could maybe make a YouTube video, which was quite big back then. And so I did. I remember wandering around Dubai with a camera, and people were like, are you a famous YouTuber? And I was like, no. But it was really fun, and I created those videos, and that was the starting point for the YouTube channel. But it was also the starting point for the next stage of my career. During my time of teaching in the UK, I decided that it would be quite interesting to look at teaching abroad. I say next door neighbour, they were a few doors down, but they had started to teach internationally, and I started to hear stories of how they were teaching and what things were like. So I, like I say, was a bit of a misfit. Didn't quite feel settled at home, and knew that I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I went through that process of messaging them, seeing what things were like, and they said, yeah, just come and see what the school's like. That's a bit of a journey, but during one of the half terms, I managed to find some really cheap flights, and so we did just that. They showed me around the school, fell in love with the school, was great. And then it really focused my mind then on to what the next steps would be, because at the time I was just living at home, single, didn't have a tremendous amount of opportunities coming my way. My career trajectory was kind of outlined for me, and it was work your way up to headship if that's what you want to do. But I thought there's got to be something slightly different, so I decided to go and teach in Dubai. There was a lot of different steps that I had to go through to get that job teaching in Dubai, and that is what I think, say probably 60% of this channel is the foundations is teaching abroad. And I think that's where this podcast is quite interesting, because I've got a really interesting international perspective. I've obviously got my UK teaching experience, I've got my international perspective teaching experience, and I think it's interesting to get other teachers from around the world to share their perspective on things. And I'm hoping that this podcast will allow me to do that, to show you opinions and insights that you might not necessarily have heard of or seen before. Teaching in Dubai deserves its own episode of different things that happened, what I learned, how things grew, but there was definitely a lot more creative. It was a great opportunity for me to learn different things about different people, and to pursue my goal of being that misfit, and to, give it the mover and shaker, I guess, in that region of supporting teachers. Because my journey to Dubai was not a straightforward journey in the slightest. If you go on my YouTube channel, you'll see lots of different videos about this, but essentially I had to figure a lot of things out. And during that process of figuring things out, I ended up meeting my wife, who was also a teacher out there and had just moved over. So we ended up going on this crazy journey together of figuring out teaching in the UAE, travel, etc., and learning all sorts of different things along the way. Dubai, UAE is amazing, but it can also be a bubble. During my time of teaching in Dubai, I loved it. And it was also a thing where I was like, very similar to when I was an RQT. And you'll perhaps start to spot a bit of a trend with my content creation. I was like, is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my career? And at the time, content creation was going well, and I just wanted to kind of try something a little bit different. So I decided to pursue being a digital nomad. And that was a collapse. There was just a collapse because I went through 6 years of teaching in Dubai. I got married. We went on this honeymoon, and it was during that honeymoon I decided, right, I'll have a go at being a digital nomad, which means working and traveling on the go. And it just loved the traveling, didn't like the working, because South American Wi-Fi is not the greatest, and it just didn't work. So my dream of doing that was, just it's not a thing. So eventually we moved back to the UK. That was always part of our foundation of the plans, and since then, this is where I'm recording my video. It is in my room, in my house, as we've started to have those foundations. However, as I'm filming this, I am not full-time in the classroom anymore. I am a supply teacher. That comes with some stigma sometimes, because people think of supply teaching as this, oh, you're not quite a teacher. It's been really interesting and eye-opening to hear and discover different opinions of people who have seen people leave teaching and what their opinions are. But yeah, it's been a truly eye-opening process. I've been able to do supply teaching on the side because my main job now is social media marketing. But at the same time, I'm truly fascinated by like what education looks like from the outside in, rather than being on the inside out. Not on the lesson plan aims to talk about the things that are just that, those things that are not on the curriculum, because I think those are the things that are really important to talk about and perhaps not always discussed a lot. The kind of origin story for where this podcast originated from was I run a business called Teach, Travel, Triumph. The idea being that I wanted to talk to people who were around the world about things that help them, things and ways that they're able to triumph, kind of those global stories, because I don't think we talk about them. We see people doing things a lot, but we don't often get to hear what the little stories are that have caused those things to happen. I could pinpoint loads of amazing businesses that you would never have heard of, whether it's to do with rising technologies such as artificial intelligence, VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, or other really specific things like teaching current affairs with the company that I'm working with at the moment. And that's a podcast episode in itself. But I want to talk about the journeys that people went through to kind of go, right, I'm teaching one day and then the next day I'm going to build this multi-million-pound business. Or I'm teaching one day and then the next day I'm going to go and do tutoring, because I want to make sure that I have a joy for teaching and that teaching process rather than being in that system. I just want to know what things are like and how people have different experiences of education. Like I said at the start of the podcast, teaching isn't just one path. And although I'm in social media and marketing now, I am a teacher. The content that I create is to do with teaching and supporting teachers, is to do with supporting children. And I got asked on a podcast once because of my content creation, will you always be a teacher? And I think 100%. But there's almost this shame of, if you're not in the classroom, you're not a teacher. And I think that's so wrong that people are able to put that stigma on you, that if you're not in the trenches, you are not a teacher. Because we work so hard. Like I've just explained, I went through a 10-year process to this point, 10 years of teaching, of learning, of trying and failing to eventually triumph and produce what you're seeing today. But I wanted to show you people who are behind the scenes, perhaps things that you didn't realize existed, opportunities that you didn't realize existed. Because what I don't want is for teachers to fatigue a profession and quit entirely. I hope that through this podcast, I'm able to showcase opportunities that teachers might want to explore without just leaving, because we see a lot of teachers just completely leaving at the moment. And I think if I can help a few teachers to do what I do in terms of still teach, but also have their own thing and thrive and triumph in their own way. There we go. Teach, travel, thrive. That's my job done. That's why this is important, is because we don't have those discussions. So these episodes and the format of these episodes, the idea is that I want things to be a little bit shorter, because when I used to go through the process of marking, whether I was on my daily commute, I didn't have 2-3 hours to listen to an entire podcast. And if I did, I'd have it on fast. I would have 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And hopefully this is a podcast that you can listen to just in a short burst. If I have people on and they're inspiring and incredible, and those podcast episodes end up becoming 1 or 2 hours, that is going to be the nature of those episodes. But for the shorthand podcasts, I've got lots of different solo episodes that I think just be short, sharp bursts that are really interesting to talk about. Things that perhaps you've not heard of. I want to have opportunities for you to have questions, perhaps whether it's lollipop stick questions or something along those lines. That's going to be the aim of the solo episodes, is to talk about things that we don't necessarily have a chance to talk about. Those discussions that you wish you could have in the staff room, but because, like me, you feel a bit like a misfit, you know you'd get those weird looks. But without having those challenging conversations, you can't go from being a misfit to a mover and a shaker, for sure. So I'm going to talk about people that are doing it, people that are in the process of doing it, and also explore those opinions, questions, and things to help those who want to be doing those two things to do those two things. And I hope that is clear and makes sense. So the pillars of what this show is standing on at the moment is kind of 3 things. And those pillars are based on my personal interests. 1, kind of in entrepreneurial flexibility to explore other options within the field of education. 2, of well-being, because I want people to be able to come to this podcast to support them with a range of different things, questions, queries. And then 3, those kind of rising technologies. I have a huge passion and dedication for technology. Sometimes on my YouTube channel, you'll see technology support videos. And I think that technology is kind of one of the great opportunities at the moment for teachers to use that. Although technology is quite limited, I think there's lots of free things that are available to support teachers in a range of different ways to help them innovate, but also save time. And it's that time that teachers can then use, if they feel like a misfit, to become a mover and shaker. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing going forward in terms of where we go with things. The format is going to be shorter episodes for solo, longer episodes for guests. And yeah, I've got lots of different things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about different income streams as a teacher, not just having that, teaching salary. There's different things that you can do with the teaching profession. I wanted to talk about professions that you can go into from teaching that are still in the education sphere. I want to talk personally about how I went into content creation, going a bit deeper than just this episode. I want to talk about things that I did for my own well-being, whether it's diet, fitness, etc. And I'm sure that during guest episodes, those things will also be explored. During the guest episodes, I want to get people in who are perhaps teachers who have stepped into the role of supporting teachers, whether it's things with money. There's all sorts of other really random things like maternity and those opportunities and discussions that you'll have. Discussions for well-being, but also, more importantly, those discussions with businesses that are kind of thriving, because I think it's really interesting to hear from those people about how they became, we use this phrase sometimes, teacherpreneurs. So that's teacher entrepreneurs, and I think that'll be interesting to talk about too. So that is a kind of roundabout way of me talking about some of the different things that I hope you'll see during the duration of this season of podcasts. I want to interview a few interesting people. I want to talk about a range of different things. And hopefully, just like with all of my YouTube videos, if this just helps one person out there in the same way that content helped me in the past, that's my job done. That's exactly what this is for, is to help one person out there with a range of different things. Thinking about the takeaway from this podcast, I'm not really sure, but hopefully it's just hype that people are interested in this podcast going, oh, okay, there are people out there who are a bit like on the fence. And I want to make it really clear that being a misfit in education does not make you a bad teacher. Sometimes people just they want to explore the opposite of being Miss Honey. Sometimes people feel like Miss Honey by day, but by night, they want to explore things a little bit differently. And that's me. I still stand by being that Miss Honey by day and being that little bit different by night. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, if you see this podcast, reach out, drop a question for a future episode. What types of episodes are you interested in hearing? What types of guests are you interested in having? I want to know exactly where you want this podcast to go, because as much as this is a selfish endeavor, I want this to be a joint opportunity for you as a consumer and listener to also have a role in creating and forming this podcast too, because it's not on the lesson plan to do what we're doing right now. We're going to be talking about things outside of the curriculum to help you with doing the things inside of it. And hopefully this is going to help just one person out there. And if that person is you, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. Hopefully you can drop a question where you want to see this podcast go, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode. Until the next one, I'm out.